Did you watch the House of the Dragon trailer released just the other day and think, man, I wish there was a detail-obsessed nerd that could explain what the hell I just watched, while also being entertaining, funny, and possibly handsome? Sorry you couldn't find that person's video, instead you got mine. What we're going to do today is go through frame by frame of that trailer like a very normal person, and then break down my biggest takeaways in a handy numbered list. Before we get going, just to get this out of the way, as people I am sure are wiggling their fingers getting ready to tell me which dragons are which, a lot of the dragon identities in this trailer are uncertain right now, and there's entire long threads all across Twitter and Reddit, especially in my mentions, trying to figure out which dragon is which at the moment. So I'm going to make some guesses, and some of them are going to be wrong, and we're both going to have to live with that reality. We're going to have a lot of fun. Also, I just wanted to update people from my last teaser video that, alright, I did get attacked by the Eldritch Tom Bombadil from Lord of the Rings, but totally don't worry, I'm fine, won't happen again. I locked the door to infinity this time. He shouldn't be able to get in, right? Oh god. Same as last time, I'm going to go over literally what happens in the trailer scene by scene, and then we'll talk about them, and then make sure nothing snuck in from the outer planes of existence to hunt our blood. And also, of course, there'll be major spoilers for the rest of House of the Dragon and the book Fire and Blood it is based on. You have been warned. I'm going to ignore these opening scenes right here. They're all repeated later in the trailer. This is literally just here as a stinger for the audience to jolt them out of their seats with a dragon roar. Also, a lot of what we're going to see in this trailer is actually repeats from the previous teasers, or just more footage from those scenes. Speaking of, from the first teaser, we see young Rhaenyra walking into the mostly empty throne room with her father Viserys waiting on the throne. Then we hear Viserys talking, and he says,
"It was clearer than a memory."
While we see him standing in front of a bonfire, possibly his father Jaehaerys' funeral. The Targaryens are well known for burning their dead, especially on Dragonstone. Viserys talking again.
And I heard the sound of thunder in the mountains.
While in the background we see what looks like the Kingsguard by their white cloaks racing through a forest. Viserys continues again.
Splintering shields and ringing swords.
And we see more from that duel from the first teaser with Daemon and Criston Cole hammering away at each other at a tournament. And someone drawing a sword, possibly Criston Cole, in front of Rhaenyra. Viserys again.
And I placed my heir upon the Iron Throne.
And we see him cutting his hand on one of the swords of the Iron Throne, also known as the Danger Chair, if you want to impress your friends. And we hear Viserys again saying,
"And all the dragons roared as one."
Meanwhile, in the background, we see Rhaenyra and her dragon Syrax flying over King's Landing towards the enormous dragon pit before it becomes the decrepit ruin that we saw in Game of Thrones. Here we see some carriages passing by a dragon statue, what looks to be King's Landing most likely. Otto Hightower speaks up saying,
"I consider the matter urgent, that of your succession."
Meanwhile, on the screen, we see a scene with the small council room with Master of Laws Lionel Strong, Hand of the King Otto Hightower, Master of Ships Corlys Velaryon, Archmaester Mellos, and, can't forget, Master of Coin Lord Beesbury. Lionel Strong cuts in.
Who else would have a claim?
And we see Daemon entering a large tourney ground near the dragon pit, crowds cheering like he was Sir Ulrich von Liechtenstein. Otto Hightower cuts back in.
The firstborn child.
We see Rhaenyra staring at her uncle in wonder as he enters the tourney ground. Definitely not foreshadowing for her future husband. Gross. And Lionel Strong again.
Rhaenyra, no queen has ever sat the Iron Throne.
Meanwhile, we see Rhaenyra and Laenor Velaryon walking along a beach looking very, very unhappy with their arranged marriage prospects to each other. Corlys Velaryon speaks up.
The king has an heir, Daemon Targaryen.
Meanwhile, we see Daemon is being shown in his armor with his boys, the Gold Cloaks, ready to go break some skulls. We see Corlys finishing his speech in the small council room, delivering his very curious support for Daemon over Rhaenyra. Viserys pipes up in response.
I will not be made to choose between my brother and my daughter.
And again, we see the Gold Cloaks lined up like they're about to go play a homecoming game, and we see Viserys very annoyed at the suggestion of Daemon as his heir. The Gold Cloaks thump their armor for their commander in unison, his own personal army. Next, we see Rhaenyra and Harrold Westerling overlooking a courtyard of some kind, appointing perhaps a new member of the Kingsguard. Wait, is that Criston Cole's music? It is! It's Criston Cole! Honestly, I'm not sure in this scene if they could have made him more like Kit Harington. He's about one husky McQueen from making the entire fandom melt. Then we see a showdown on the causeway up to Dragonstone with 2 dragons flying in the sky. One is almost certainly Daemon's Caraxes, unsure on the identity of the other. Next we see Rhaenys, the queen who never was, speaking with her husband Corlys, or maybe dictating what's about to happen.
Rhaenyra's succession will be challenged. Knives will come out.
Meanwhile, a younger Daemon, swaggering and wearing his crown of the King of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea, enters the packed Great Hall. A member of the Kingsguard stops Daemon by putting his sword against his chest. Daemon looks very surprised. These Kingsguard are prepared to kill him, apparently. Then we see Alicent in a throne room or sept, and Rhaenyra talking.
You are the king. Your duty is to take a new wife.
Not sure on that second one, that might be Alicent. It sounded like the voice changed, but the subtitles said it was still Rhaenyra. Next we see Alicent and King Viserys alone together, clasping hands. How cute. Cut to Viserys sitting on the Iron Throne, wearing his crown and brandishing black fire in front of his brother while he says,
I have decided to name a new heir.
Daemon responds, looking and sounding incredibly hurt.
I'm your heir.
Next is surprise, Laenor Velaryon.
War is afoot.
Man, you have no idea how happy I am HBO puts the captions and who is speaking in these things. Continuation from the previous scene of dragons overhead, we see again Otto Hightower and his soldiers facing off against Daemon, Mysaria, his gold cloaks, and the dragon egg that Daemon is holding. Next to Rhaenyra talking to Criston Cole, and she says,
Do you think the realm will ever accept me as their queen?
Rhaenys, though, comes back with this line,
A woman would not inherit the Iron Throne.
and we get a shot of more lords from the Seven Kingdoms swearing their oath to protect the young Rhaenyra and her claim when she eventually ascends the throne, literally being backed by her father Viserys. Rhaenys again saying this,
Because that is the order of things.
while she is talking to a young Rhaenyra, well, maybe not talking to, sounds more like patronizing or manipulating. We see an older Rhaenyra on screen walking out of a tunnel, while the younger Rhaenyra says this.
When I'm queen, I will create a new order.
Rhaenyra is going to break create a new order. Sorry, slip of a tongue there. I could have sworn I've heard that before. Next we see dragons flying through the sky. My sources, my dragon keepers, say that this is Syrax and Rhaenyra. Then a scene of Daemon and Corlys' war in the Stepstones against the Pirate Lords and the Triarchy and the Dornish, overlooking the fire and blood in the aftermath. Character name Regio Haratus, who I've never heard of before, says this.
Your family has dragons.
And we see Daemon all sweaty in the middle of a battlefield, killing at will as he does with Dark Sister. Viserys pipes up with,
There are power men should never have trifled with.
and we see a dragon egg baking in a brazier. Looks tasty. Perhaps a good dragon huevos rancheros to start off the day. Cut to Daemon and Caraxes snuggling, giving his big draggy puppy some scritches. It is just cute, like a giant murderous fire-breathing puppy. Also, you can see Caraxes wearing a riding harness and some kind of armor. A young Aemon Targaryen at night meeting the largest living dragon, Vhagar. Wait, did I say Aemond? Sure. Okay, whatever. He's Aemon Targaryen now. Vhagar's enormous claw pounding down in front of the boy like a T-Rex. Then we get a scene of an unknown man in a long cloak in a cave watching fire erupt. Unclear if these are explosions or dragon fire. Could very well be Daemon deep in Dragonstone egg hunting. Alicent Hightower speaks.
If Rhaenyra comes into power, she could cause.
And we see her in front of the Iron Throne like she just sat up from it. Rhaenyra in front of her as well. Both have turned to look at something or someone in the hall that has caught their attention. Possibly Mushroom. Alicent continues.
Of any challenge to her succession.
And we see this is the older Alicent talking to someone with long white hair. It's unclear who, maybe Viserys. Again, we see the gold cloaks and their commander Daemon charging through some gate somewhere. And then here Syrax or Caraxes? Melees? Not really sure. Diving through the air. We hear from Rhaenyra again.
And to inherit the Iron Throne.
And we see her walking up to her father's crown very appraisingly, like she likes the look of it. Cut to Rhaenyra and Daemon on Driftmark, with Rhaenyra saying this.
He will block my way.
Who is she that Rhaenyra is talking about? I think we're going to find out quite soon. Oh look, there it is. It's Alicent in a dark room. Then we see Criston Cole fighting what looks like Almond One Eye post losing an eye, possibly getting a few of the Strongs in the background. That might be Harwin, aka Breakbones, looking on. Get hype! Otto Hightower says this.
Our hearts remain as one.
Meanwhile, we see the young Alicent and Rhaenyra praying next to each other. Alicent praying like a good girl, Rhaenyra looking like she's up to some mischief. However, we hear from Alicent,
Oh, our hearts were never one.
and then we see the older Alicent and Rhaenyra separated at a table, looking quite annoyed to be in each other's company. A recreation, by the way, of this artwork from Fire and Blood. Corlys Velaryon, the absolute unit, leading his troops to battle on the Stepstones with what looks like a gigantic axe fighting some Dornishmen. Corlys' armor is not ornate like Daemon's, but more effective and good at what it does. No dragon horns to grab onto, simple armor made for war, decorated with a few signs of his house. Perfectly sums up Corlys, practical first, with a little bit of ornamentation afterwards. Rhaenys says,
Have you never imagined yourself?
and we see Alicent deep in thought alone, surrounded by candles and what looks like a handkerchief held to her face. Rhaenys finishes her thought,
On the Iron Throne.
and we see that she is talking to Alicent, who looks back at her, distraught, seemingly on the verge of tears. Apparently, the queen who never was is playing both sides. A dragon flies closely over Otto Hightower on Dragonstone, scaring them, reminiscent of Jon and Davos Seaworth in the latter seasons of Game of Thrones. See a Baratheon Lancer at a tourney ready to charge. Hey, Baratheon fans, you have been represented. Team Velaryon making an entrance again. I think this has been in literally every trailer so far. It does look cool though. Again, we see scenes of the Stepstones battlefields, a bare-chested man swinging an axe at a captive who's apparently tied to something. Then we see what is presumably Daemon and Caraxes burning his enemies alive on the Stepstones. This could possibly be Laenor and Seasmoke, as the Velaryons were Daemon's partner in his conquest, and they have played with the timelines a little bit. Then we see two figures at a massive bonfire. This very well could be a reverse shot from the earlier one of Viserys when he is staring into the flames. It's hard to make out who the woman next to him is, although she does appear to be quite pregnant. Then, Crag-ass Crab Feeder, a character I had to look up, a Triarchy admiral who fought Daemon with a crazy cane from WWE style mask on. Daemon in the gold cloaks beating up people under the cover of darkness, as they do. Then we see more of that scene with Alicent taking out Arya's dagger and charging on Rhaenyra. Then Almond One Eye in a hood looking as sinister as possible with kind of a crazed expression, but also notably looking quite a bit like Daemon. We hear Alicent talking to Rhaenyra with, meanwhile, we see Daemon pulling a pretty woman on his teenage niece and future wife. That's right, he marries his niece. Alicent continues.
Where is sacrifice?
And here we see what looks like a hand removing a dress from a shoulder, very possibly Rhaenyra and Daemon. We see Caraxes again in armor and saddle, and he's looking positively ferocious. Then the dagger being swung by Alicent only inches from Rhaenyra's eye, and we see an overhead shot of this attempted stabbing. We can see the Velaryon soldiers protecting the Velaryon children and Rhaenyra's sons. Only really one soldier actually trying to stop the scuffle, while everyone else is watching or being held up. It's almost like everyone's watching to see if Alicent will actually kill Rhaenyra, which is not foreshadowing in the slightest. Rhaenyra responds,
Now they see you as you are.
whispering this to Alicent, holding the dagger back and then flinging Alicent off of her. And finally, we see a truly gigantic dragon come into frame. This is quite possibly Syrax or Vhagar. I personally hope it's Vhagar, but many think right now it is Syrax, Rhaenyra's dragon, which would make sense as it's following her face. But again, I want it to be Vhagar because Vhagar's awesome. For my breakdown of this trailer, I'm not going to talk about everything that's in it. I mean, where's the fun in that? Every news outlet, blog, podcast, and YouTube channel has already done that. Instead, I want to talk about the things that really stuck out to me personally as the most tantalizing possibilities for the show. My recommendations to you about what I think you should pay attention to in a trailer that may be very important for the show to come. And as I said before, I've prepared these in a numbered list of 6 items. Ready? Number 1. Dragon Dreams. Here we go. Let's not dilly-dally and bury the lead. By far the most surprising and intriguing part of the trailer is the opening lines being spoken by King Viserys and their wide-ranging implications that could lead to a total change in perception of the Targaryen family during this time. What I've done here is I've put his lines in order so you can hear them all at once.
It was clearer than a memory. And I heard the sound of thundering hooves.
splintering shields and ringing swords. And I placed my heir upon the Iron Throne. And all the dragons roared as one.
For book fans, you clever nerds already know where I'm going with this. For show watchers and fan of Game of Thrones, like, what's the big deal, right? Viserys had a really realistic dream. All right, happens all the time. Well, the big deal here is the history of the Targaryens and their long-standing abilities to receive prophetic dreams of the future known as dragon dreams. This is something that was largely cut out of Game of Thrones, with Daenerys only receiving the visions from the warlocks in Qarth, and also the brief ones she got where she knew her dragon eggs were going to hatch ahead of time. She brags about those to the Spice King of Qarth that her dreams come true, which you can see here.
I'm no ordinary woman. My dreams come true.
However, this is much more pronounced in the books, with Daenerys having much more frequent prophetic dreams and visions. And the same is true for her ancestors, including the most famous of them all, Rhaenys the Dreamer. The daughter of Lord Aenar Targaryen, the exile of Valyria, Rhaenys convinced her father to flee the Freehold, seeing its doom coming years ahead of time. Aenar eventually agreed, and the Targaryens left the Freehold for Dragonstone, with all of Valyria laughing at their foolishness to go. Until the 14 volcanoes on Valyria exploded all at once, and Valyria itself was destroyed in one night. There were no more laughs heard from across the ocean in Valyria anymore. Daemon the Drunkard, eldest son of King Maekar Targaryen, also experienced prophetic dreams of the future, as seen in the Dunk and Egg story, The Hedge Knight. Daemon's prophetic dreams tormented him, so that he turned to alcohol to try and pass out every night into a dreamless stupor, destroying the prince's life in the process. But even still, his dreams always came true. In his first meeting with Duncan the Tall, Daemon predicts the ending of the novella he's in with startling accuracy. In the third Dunk and Egg story, The Mystery Knight, same sort of thing happens. Daemon II Blackfyre, undercover as John the Fiddler, predicts the end of the novella after meeting Duncan the Tall. And these are just 3 examples of many. The role of prophetic dreams in influencing the decisions of the Targaryen family cannot be understated. Even those who don't have them themselves heed the warnings of their kin who do. That King Viserys I claims in this trailer that he is experiencing what is very typical of these vivid dragon dreams could give us a much different understanding of the man. In Fire and Blood, the book House of the Dragon is of course based on, there's virtually no mention of prophecy nor magic at the time, which is strange because in A Song of Ice and Fire proper, when Dany's dragons hatch, magic seems to return to the world. Yet the Maesters recorded almost no instances of magic while the dragons were alive after Aegon's conquest, which seems, strange to say the least. But there are hints left by George when that is happening. Oftentimes, strange and odd decisions by the Targaryens are blamed on insanity. It very well could be that they're following the dreams of dragons to glory or their doom. Daemon the Drunkard is a prime example. Somebody the realm wrote off as a drunkard who had lost his mind when in fact he's being tormented by his gift. Viserys receiving these dreams, combined with his decision to seat Rhaenyra on the Iron Throne against the advice of some of his counselors, could cast a very different light on the character and his motivations. In Fire and Blood, his decision to put Rhaenyra on the Iron Throne after him is chalked up to him being obstinate and kind of an unimpressive king on a power trip. If he believed, though, that the fate of his kingdom and people depended on it, though, that's a very different story. Let's look at what he says as well. Thundering hooves, splintering shield, and ringing swords. So obviously battle of some kind. And then he placed his heir on the Iron Throne and all the dragons roared. Well, which heir? Are we talking Rhaenyra, Daemon, Aegon? Were the dragons roaring in anger, approval, pain? This is the tricky part of how Martin writes these prophetic dreams. They're often highly symbolic and difficult to figure out ahead of time. As I mentioned, Daemon the Drunkard and Daemon II Blackfyre I mentioned earlier interpreted their visions incorrectly, although it's obvious in hindsight by the end of the novellas what they actually meant. It's a sword without a hilt. Those who follow their dreams do so at their own risk, and sometimes to their own deaths and downfall. For instance, in many of the dreams, characters and images are interchangeable. Like in The Hedge Knight, Daemon dreams of a great dragon dying on Ashford Meadow, thinking it meant himself, when it actually meant his uncle Prince Baelor. And during the Mystery Night, Daemon II dreamed of a dragon egg at the castle hatching at the end of the tournament, when it was actually meant to be non-literal. It meant Prince Aegon, otherwise known as Egg, coming into his own as a person and gaining confidence, with the dragon egg itself remaining dormant. Very possible that Viserys misinterpreted whatever dreams he's been getting as maybe the only way for his house to survive with Rhaenyra on the throne after him, which, sounds crazy when considering the incredible cost of the Dance of the Dragons, but it kind of ends up being true. In the end, Viserys' bloodline does continue ruling after him and Rhaenyra. Whether they need to go to war for that happen is another story. As I mentioned, in these sort of dreams, dragons and Targaryens are often interchangeable. So when he says all the dragons are roaring, that could mean instead all the Targaryens screaming, his family members screaming out in pain as they died horrifically in war, as they ended up doing. It's very hard to know ahead of time. It only makes sense looking backwards. There's another subtle thing at play as well. Very often the Targaryens don't just dream events nearby to themselves, like Daemon predicting the outcome of the Ashford Meadow tourney. They sometimes see much bigger events, again like Daenys the Dreamer and the Doom of Valyria. Gurm has hinted in interviews that Aegon the Conqueror himself decided to conquer the kingdoms of Westeros not out of greed or bloodlust or power seeking, but because he dreamed that the White Walkers were returning, and the only way to stop them is if he took over Westeros. Of course, the White Walkers did not return during Aegon's lifetime. However, the Targaryens have another habit with their prophetic dreams. They write them down for future generations if they don't come true right away. Daenys the Dreamer famously wrote down all of hers in the book Signs and Portents, a secret book supposedly lost to history, but very well could have been kept by the Targaryen kings since Aegon I passed down from king to prince or princess. And who knows? Maybe Aegon added his own visions of the cold winds rising beyond the wall and fire and blood rising to meet them. If Viserys is privy to these records of dreams and is having his own prophetic dreams, it's entirely possible that his motivations are not just to seat his daughter on the Iron Throne, but to stop an apocalypse by any means necessary. And that could be why he insists Rhaenyra must be his heir, no matter the cost, even if it means risking war. Of course, that's not something he could ever really admit to his counselors or his subjects, because he might be perceived as losing his mind, which maybe he is. Also, fun fact, that dream Viserys detailed at the beginning, the thundering hooves, the shield shattering, swords ringing, a Targaryen princess on the throne, dragons roaring, you know who that could actually be about? Viserys' long-lost descendant, Daenerys Targaryen, with her army of Dothraki and her 3 dragons roaring over Westeros to face the White Walkers. Just saying. Point number 2, the manipulations of Rhaenys and Corlys. Of course, this is about the surprising court maneuvers of the leaders of the Velaryon house, Corlys and Rhaenys. Upon reading Fire and Blood, there's a definite sense that Corlys and Rhaenys, otherwise known as the Queen Who Never Was, were as close as it gets to being the good guys of the Dance of the Dragons. They sided with Rhaenyra against Otto Hightower's power grab for his grandson, they fought nobly, they stuck by the Blacks to the bitter end, and experienced tremendous loss in a way that almost feels like punishment from the gods of Westeros. Rhaenys in particular is seen as the MVP of Rhaenyra's faction, a shrewd warrior and planner who is their greatest asset alongside her dragon Meleys, except for maybe Daemon and Caraxes. However, this trailer showed us a very different side of Rhaenys and Corlys with their manipulations in the court of King Viserys. The most striking moment is Rhaenys, alone with an upset and maybe sobbing Alicent Hightower, asking quietly,
"Have you never imagined yourself on the Iron Throne?"
Alicent is portrayed absolutely in Fire and Blood along with her father Otto as the bad guys of the conflict, with Alicent in particular supposedly letting her rivalry with Rhaenyra go from just dislike to outright war like some kind of overgrown catfight. Here though, we see Rhaenys manipulating Alicent and pushing her into conflict with Rhaenyra by playing on Alicent's vanity to possibly see herself on the Iron Throne, much like Cersei Lannister does later. It's a very insidious question, not only feeding into Alicent's ambitions, but also questions whether Rhaenyra should rule at all. The rule-breaking, devil-may-care Rhaenyra who gets everything she wants and does anything she wants, versus the prim and proper and law-abiding Alicent. Surely the realm would be better under Alicent's disciplined stewardship instead of Rhaenyra. Eve Best recently said in an interview to Entertainment Weekly that Rhaenys is an incredibly skilled political manipulator.
She's able to navigate this incredibly dense political environment with such
finesse, calm, and effortless grace. It's impossible to deny that underneath, there is this sword in her heart of that core wound, which is a combination of all kinds of things. This caught me off guard since, as I said, she's more often just sort of seen as a badass dragon rider, but you can see from these few clips in the trailer exactly what Eve Best was talking about. Another moment is Rhaenys telling her husband Corlys that Rhaenyra's claim will also be challenged, and the knives will come out for the young monarch to be. On the face of it, it seems like wisdom, a accurate reading of the situation, but also perhaps what their strategy should be. Maybe they're the ones that should be having their knives out. Rhaenys herself doesn't have a seat on the small council, but Corlys does as Master of Ships, and we see him advocating for Daemon over Rhaenyra to King Viserys directly. Seems a bit confusing, right? Rhaenys and Corlys end up on Rhaenyra's side. Why were they working against her at first? The truth is that Corlys and Rhaenys had thrown in with Daemon, supporting him in his war in the Stepstone Islands against the Triarchy of Essos, the Pirates, and the Dornish. Viserys had spurned the Velaryon's daughter Laena for marriage, instead choosing Alicent Hightower, and this had infuriated the Seahorses. Their alliance with Daemon, especially after his victory and crowning, held the potential to seriously challenge Viserys' authority in a potential civil war, and Daemon's alliance with the Velaryons surely included that he would someday marry Laena Velaryon. You know, after his wife Rhea Royce was dealt with. It's only the marriage of Rhaenyra to Laenor Velaryon that brought the powerful faction back into the royal fold, and again that got them to switch their support to Rhaenyra. So it's fair to say that the Velaryons are cunning, and their desire for power is going to shape the political landscape of Westeros in a very drastic way, and it seems like Rhaenys is going to be at the forefront of that. Not only that, but Rhaenys harbors ill will towards Viserys himself and the rest of the lords that voted against her at the Great Council, denying her and her children their rights to the Iron Throne. You really get a sense here that Rhaenys is being almost an agent of chaos, that she's sowing discord in the court as revenge, but also to try and help her and her family take the Iron Throne back from Viserys and his kin, whom she considers a usurper. Her conversation with Rhaenyra, similar to one with Alicent, shows her encouraging distrust against those around the princess. Well, except Rhaenys, of course. They could always trust. Pinky swear. Rhaenys and Corlys should make for fascinating political players in House of the Dragon, with their power, intelligence, and desire to do anything for House Velaryon, pushing the Game of Thrones to its breaking point. Point number 3, Rhaenyra and Alicent and the Kuleshov Effect. Let's take a detour here from recounting lore that may or may not show up in the show and talk instead about filmmaking and editing. Similar to my last teaser analysis where I talked about color grading and how it affects viewers' perceptions of what they're watching, today we're going to explore the Kuleshov Effect. In case you can't tell, I obviously watch a lot of the YouTube channel Folding Ideas, and he has a fantastic video in the description on this. I'm going to link in the description if you want to check it out and learn more. The Kuleshov Effect is fundamental to filmmaking. It is the idea that the meaning of each image shown to the audience can be changed drastically by changing what came before it and what came after. Named after Lev Kuleshov, who came up with the idea, he created examples where he would show the blank expression of a person on screen, then cut to another image of something else entirely, and then back to the person. Then he would show the same film again, but change the middle image. And audiences report thinking that the person's expression changed despite it being the exact same footage. Their perceptions of the person changed based on only the middle image, with no other changes to the person. As somebody that watches a lot of YouTube and presumably TV, you're very used to it, but probably hadn't really thought about it. It's one of the primary tools in editing to get your audience to feel or understand something by juxtapositioning shots against each other to create more meaning from each clip in a vacuum. A famous example of this is the murder spree at the end of The Godfather. The assassinations of the head of the 5 families of New York at the order of Michael Corleone is intercut with scenes of him at a baptism pronouncing sin, evil, and even Satan to the priest. On their own, these two sequences mean very different things. The baptism perhaps showing how Michael is serious about his faith and cares for the child he's becoming the godfather of. Meanwhile, the murder spree may be just a shocking display of violence. Here's where the Kuleshov effect comes in. The juxtaposition between the sequences of Michael promising to renounce sin while the worst sins imaginable are being committed on his orders creates a very different understanding of Michael, that he's morally bankrupt, a liar, a hollow shell of a man. Every word passing from his mouth is a lie, refuted by the murders being carried out. The innocent young soldier you saw at the beginning of the film is gone. What has replaced him is something far more evil. The Dawn is born, Michael is dead. The Kuleshov effect is exploited to create that meaning which would not be seen in either sequence on their own. It is only cut together that the meaning is created. Why we're talking about this effect is Rhaenyra and Alicent. In this trailer, the editors go to great lengths to try and convince to the audience how the relationship of the two friends has fractured over time from being close into bitter enemies that are trying to stab each other. However, two scenes placed right after each other is the best and most dramatic example of this. I'm talking about the two scenes seen here of the young Alicent and Rhaenyra praying right next to each other, and the following scene where they are at a feast but physically separated wearing unhappy expressions. The juxtaposition of these two scenes tells you very efficiently the path of their relationship, from being close as teens emotionally and physically sitting next to each other to becoming distant and annoyed at their presence as adults and physically sitting apart. On their own, each of these mean far less than they do combined. For instance, who's to say why Rhaenyra and Alicent are looking annoyed at a feast if you just see them sitting apart? Maybe someone just got up unexpectedly, or there's annoying guests at the table, or the food is subpar. The same for the praying. It could just be two girls praying in front of some candles. There's very little meaning for each scene on its own. However, by showing the second feast with them distant after previously showing them close together and in much better moods, the meaning is created. They're apart because they don't want to be near each other. Their expressions and annoyance are for the other and not anything else in the scene. You understand instinctively that the friendship has been broken over time, and also creates a natural question for the audience. How did this happen? Why did they stop being friends? When did this happen? And let me tell you, these are all questions HBO is prepared to answer for you one Sunday at a time starting in August. A prime example of the Kuleshov effect. Number 4, just so many dragons. The next thing I know you're all dying to hear about is the dragons themselves. What this trailer did in just a couple minutes is that it really established personality and a sense of day-to-day life for the dragons during the height of the Targaryen power. This is mostly showed off with the Bloodworm, Caraxes, the dragon of Daemon. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, Matt Smith describes Caraxes as
the sort of avatars of one another. They're both just grumpy and moody. So I do think there's a kind of weird symbiotic sort of molecular thing that goes on.
And in this trailer, we saw both sides of the dragon, really making it a character as much as the other actors on screen. We see Caraxes soaring over Dragonstone, roaring at Otto Hightower and his band of soldiers, blocking the way of his beloved Daemon, and also quite possibly roasting Triarchy soldiers alive as they try to flee from the flying doom. And then there's the more heartwarming side. Caraxes here being very gentle with Daemon despite their enormous difference in size and strength. With almost no effort, Caraxes could kill Daemon, yet instead the dragon is practically nuzzling the man. When Daemon wants him to do something, Caraxes shakes his head and grumbles, more like a disobedient puppy who has to go to the vet rather than the monstrous engine of destruction it is. And as Matt Smith and Eve Best both said in their interviews, the dragons are being used in the show as extra characterization for the writers as well, noting that they feel like the dragons are an extension of the writer rather than just beasts of burden for war and plot devices. Their emotions and personality bleed into each other. Like Caraxes, Daemon as well is capable of extreme violence and cruelty, practically uncontrollable, even by the most powerful man in Westeros, King Viserys. And yet he does have a softer, gentle side that he shows only to special people. Matt Smith spoke about this idea that he's playing Daemon as someone who is more than just the rogue prince, a character with depth, and a soft side that he's afraid to let be seen by anyone. Following Game of Thrones, where really only Drogon got a personality while Viserion and Rhaegar were just kind of there, what was showed off here in this trailer should be a boon to the dragon enthusiasts in the fandom. You know who I'm talking about. The show has seen you. In terms of what dragons were seen in the trailer itself, it's a little tough to say beyond some obvious ones. Daemon and Craxes are a given, of course. It also seems certain that Rhaenyra and her dragon Syrax are depicted in these scenes. And of course, we see the young Aemon Targaryen, who bonded unexpectedly with the greatest dragon of them all, or at least the only one still living, gigantic and ancient Rhaegar. Other than that, it's a little tough to say. We don't really get a good look at several of these dragons, nor their riders. And there is a raging debate in my Twitter mentions about if the dragon at the end is Rhaegar or Syrax, with people citing promotional posters, years-old tweets from calendar artists, and, I swear to God, Funko Pops as proof. It's great, isn't it? The fandom is alive again. We're arguing over nothing. I miss this. If you want to stay on the conservative side, there's definitely 3 dragons in this trailer, but the potential for a lot more, with the dragons that are seen at Dragonstone possibly being the wild ones that live around the volcano. Some of the flying shots could, instead of being Syrax and Rhaenyra, be Rhaenys and Maelys. And some think that the dragon burning up the Stepstones might actually be Laenor Velaryon and his dragon Seasmoke rather than Daemon. I mean, who knows really? We'll find out in August what the truth is. According to promotional material, there should be up to 20 dragons in the show, all with unique physiology, coloring, and personality, so buckle up. If you thought learning Game of Thrones names was hard, you are not prepared for dragons. Number 5. Daemon's crown. Also want to make sure that we mention Daemon's crown and what it means to him in the story we're about to watch. You can see it here. The hard outer exterior of Daemon cracks in almost a heartbreaking way when his brother tells him,
I have decided to name a new heir. I'm your heir.
It's really hard to understate how profoundly Daemon felt betrayed by Viserys. Daemon was forced to marry Rhea Royce by King Jaehaerys, despite his true heart laying with his Mistress of Whispers, Mysaria. After a rumor made back to Viserys that Daemon made a joke about Viserys' dead newborn son Balon, Viserys formally disinherited his brother as heir for Rhaenyra. Although, as we talked about earlier, that may have prophetic reasons more behind it than a bad joke. Daemon is also heard in the first trailer saying,
Dreams didn't make us kings. Dragons did.
Indicating that Daemon may even be responding to Viserys explaining his dreams. Nevertheless, Daemon was furious and despondent at his brother's decision. Later, when Mysaria became pregnant and Daemon wanted to give his child a dragon egg, Viserys forbade that too and ordered Daemon to send Mysaria back home to Lys. This is most likely the scene with Otto Hightower and the soldiers opposing Daemon on Dragonstone. Daemon relented unhappily. During a freak storm on her way back to Lys, Mysaria miscarried, and Daemon was crushed again, losing his own child. In the aftermath of this, and also being denied Dragonstone as his holdings, Daemon took up in a rage with Corlys Velaryon an alliance to conquer the Stepstones from the pirates in the Triarchy in Essos, making his own kingdom apart from his brother. He resolved to be everything Viserys was not. Peerless warrior and a conqueror like Aegon come again. He would be a dragon, while Viserys settled for merely being a king. And this backstory is why I wanted to point out the crown Daemon is wearing when he enters the Red Keep. This is not a crown that was given to him like Viserys. It's one that he made and took for his own. It's not a fancy band of beaten gold, but almost a primitive looking one made of what looks like bone, claws, and possibly dragon teeth. His costuming shows this as well, showing up in the king's presence with multiple weapons and what looks like his battle armor rather than the extravagant fine dress of Viserys. This is the crown a dragon would wear, how a conqueror should look, at least as Daemon perceives it. Although Daemon does, at the end of the scene, give up his crown as king of the Stepstones in Narrow Sea to rejoin the Seven Kingdoms, having, lost control of his islands, Daemon is making a point in the scene to reject Viserys by being his opposite and showing outwardly the pain his brother has caused him. A pain that slaughtering pirates and Triarchy soldiers by the hundreds and thousands could not erase. As Matt Smith has said in his interviews, Daemon is a terrible person, but one House of the Dragon is going to try and make you feel empathy for, much like Game of Thrones did with someone like Jaime and Tyrion Lannister. And my last point, number 6. House Strong get hype. Last but not least, yes, House Strong made into the trailer. Oh yeah. As you may or may not know, the Strongs along with House Blackwood are my pet favorite house during this time frame. I have produced hours and hours of streams talking about them, doing previews on each member of the Strong House, especially those alive during the Dance with the Dragons. But they are for sure secondary to the main story, supporting players to the grand dance. Well, at least at first. Lord Lionel Strong and his two sons Harwin and Larys play surprisingly large roles in the dance, and I have low-key been tracking their advertised inclusion as a sign of how close the production is sticking to the books. They're kind of an interesting canary for what level of detail they're going to, because they're exactly the kind of tertiary characters during Game of Thrones that would have been cut or greatly reduced in screen time or combined with somebody else, especially Lord Lionel Strong and Harwin. All three members of the house have been casted and announced by HBO, and at least one of them showed up in this trailer, Lionel. You can see him here, sitting at the small council table of King Viserys as Master of Laws. Also thanks to HBO's helpful captions that they put on YouTube version of this trailer, we can see that he's the one speaking these lines.
Well, who else would have a claim? Rhaenyra. No queen has ever sat the Iron Throne.
For me personally, I'm ecstatic. I want to see as much as the Strongs as I can, as although they are not the headliners of the Dance of the Dragons, their impact on the Targaryen family and Westeros at large lingers throughout the dance and beyond, particularly on Rhaenyra and her three sons, Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey. Officially, those three are the sons of Laenor Velaryon. Unofficially, they are the sons of Harwin Strong, Rhaenyra's long-term lover and sworn shield, practically her second husband. He's a giant man living up to the name Strong, something like the Hound in the Mountain with his nickname Breakbones. Larys Strong as well is a fascinating combination of Varys and Littlefinger with his own little twists. His influence and intrigues as Master of Whispers starting off slow, but rapidly ballooning as the dance rips through the green and black factions, leaving Larys the Clubfoot to direct large parts of the war. Along with Lionel, at least two of the Strong boys can be seen here in the scuffle between Rhaenyra and Alicent. But I have not been able to spot Harwin or Larys yet. This might be Harwin here during a dueling scene. Maybe in the next trailer. My hype, though, will not be abated. And there's for sure some fascinating castings of more Strongs at House of the Dragon continues if we get more seasons. Alice Rivers awaits. Overall, I thought the trailer was particularly strong. It introduced the major characters as well as their conflicts and personalities in effective ways. It delivered on fan service for dedicated fans looking for their weird obsessions like myself, while also making the show seem intriguing and exciting for apprehensive Thrones refugees and new audiences looking for their next obsession. The fandom itself feels like it's waking up after a long slumber, and if the argument over mundane details like Dragon Eyes are any indications, we're back. Yeah, the fandom's back, alright.